A Tu-134 aircraft was cleared to land, but outside, the rain poured down like it was tearing the sky apart. Visibility was almost zero, making every maneuver more difficult than usual. The pilot continued to descend, hoping the runway would appear through the rain. But no one realized the plane had already deviated from the safe landing path, and a crash was inevitable. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the ground shook violently. Over 60 passengers were killed instantly. What happened that afternoon over Kim Bin? Why did a short flight of less than 45 minutes turn into the deadliest air disaster in Vietnamese aviation history? Let's delve into the story of Vietnam Airlines Flight 815. September 3, 1997, Tan Son Nhat International Airport in Ho Chi Minh City. And busiest airport maintains a tight and familiar rhythm. At the international terminal, Vietnam Airlines Flight 815 passengers are checking in. This is an international flight operated by Vietnam Airlines, destined for Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. The flight is being carried out by a Tupolev Tu-134, a Soviet-designed jet aircraft that was the symbol of Eastern European aviation in the 70s and 90s. The aircraft was manufactured in 1984. It had been in service for 14 years before the accident occurred, and was. The aircraft is approximately 37 meters long, equipped with two Salaviv D-30 turbofan engines mounted on the rear fuselage. It can carry 70 to 80 passengers, making it ideal for regional airport conditions. At the time, Vietnam Airlines was still a relatively small national airline. It was in a period of expansion after the renovation and opening up, and the fleet mainly relied on old Soviet aircraft, such as the Tu-134, Yak-40, and An-2, etc. Against this background, the Tu-134 can be said to be the backbone of Vietnam Airlines. The entire company had 37 aircraft, carrying out most domestic and short-haul international routes daily. On that day, Vietnam Airlines Flight 815 carried a total of 60 passengers. In addition, there is a 53-year-old flight engineer, Lu Chingxin, in the cockpit. At 12:39 p.m. local time, Vietnam Airlines Flight 815 the task was carried out by 6 crew members. The captain was 59-year-old Fan One. Flight cleared for takeoff from runway 25. Captain Van Van Chow quickly exceeding 250 km per hour, about 30 seconds later. When the speed approached 270 km per hour, the captain gently pulled up the control stick, causing the landing gear to leave the ground and the entire aircraft to leave the runway. Happened, crossing the Siberian layer, flying in a northwest direction. It was embarking on a journey to Phnom Penh, with an estimated flight time of 45 minutes. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but the 66 lives on board were unaware. In just a few minutes, a terrible disaster was waiting for them. Preparing to approach Phnom Penh Airport, Cambodian air traffic control allowed the plane to descend to approximately 4,300 meters, while also issuing the latest weather and approach information to the airport. With an estimated landing time of 1:47 p.m., maintain current altitude and fly at a heading. Turn 114 degrees directly to Phnom Penh Airport's runway 23. Crew acknowledged. But the controller immediately added a reminder that the weather at the airport was bad, visibility was extremely poor. The country has just emerged from civil war, and poverty and theft are widespread. Just a few months before the accident, the airport's approach lights and navigation beacons were stolen, forcing pilots to rely on the airport's west side 5-mile-old wireless antenna to roughly determine their position. At 1:30 p.m., due to the lack of normal navigation equipment, the crew had to descend in almost zero visibility until they could see the runway with their naked eyes to land. Severe weather, strong winds, and unstable navigation signals made this landing a life-or-death gamble, and an accident could happen instantly with even a slight deviation. The VOR radio beacon used for positioning, to determine the airport's bearing. At this point, the rain became more intense. Gusts of wind and dense water vapor completely obscured the outside of the window. And other flights in the area were forced to circle in the air, waiting for the weather to improve. At 1:35 p.m., the crew requested to continue descending to approximately 5,000 feet to prepare for approaching runway 23. The request was immediately approved. But the controller reiterated that visibility was only 500 meters, requesting frequent communication. 2 minutes later, the captain reported still not seeing the runway. At this point, the plane's altitude was only 900 meters. Captain requested to descend to approximately 600 meters to search for the runway. The captain believed the runway was ahead, so he chose. After a brief silence, the controller responded with concern. Tu-134 continued to descend. Outside the window there was only white fog. Stirred by the rainstorm, no lights or runway outline could be distinguished. The indicated altitude continued to decrease, when it was only about 60 meters above the ground. The co-pilot and flight engineer shouted almost simultaneously, "Revert, we can't see anything." But the captain still believed the runway was ahead. He continued to maintain the approach, decelerate and lower the altitude. When the plane was 40 meters, the co-pilot and engineer shouted loudly for the last time. Drifting towards the military area of Gimpo Airport. When the altitude was only 14 meters, the plane's left wing swept through a tall poplar tree. About 500 meters from the end of runway 23. The trunk was drawn into the left engine, causing violent vibrations. And then it crashed into a small house again and again. In an instant, the right engine stalled and burst into flames. An eyewitness recalled that the flames first burst from the tail of the plane. A resident living nearby said that he saw the emergency exit being shaken open. Passengers were desperately trying to get out. But before they could jump out, the entire plane crashed to the ground. In the cockpit, the captain realized that his judgment was seriously wrong. Amidst the warning sounds and violent vibrations, he tried to pull up. 800 kilograms of aviation fuel ignited instantly. In a matter of seconds, the fire engulfed the entire. Rescue workers arrived at the scene. They found almost all passengers and crew were killed instantly, along with 2 cows and 6 hectares of rice paddies, by a branch, and surviving miraculously. Metal debris was scattered everywhere, and the air was filled with the smell of fuel, burned flesh, and the cries and screams of villagers who had come to help. Hundreds of local residents arrived, some helping to put out the fire, but more people looted in the chaos. With fierce arguments, either side accused the airport's navigation equipment of malfunctioning. The approach lights were not working, and the air traffic control provided inaccurate heading and position information. The Cambodian side claimed that all systems were functioning normally and that the accident was entirely due to human error. This argument lasted for months, making the investigation process full of contradictions and complexities. Finally, the Cambodian Accident Investigation Committee released its conclusion, holding the captain primarily responsible. The report stated that the captain failed to follow air traffic control instructions and continued to descend in heavy rain and near zero visibility. Despite repeated warnings from the first officer and flight engineer, the captain insisted that the runway was just ahead. In addition, the captain maintained autopilot after the plane descended below a safe altitude, causing a delayed reaction. More seriously, the captain didn't execute the missed approach repeatedly advised by ATC. The lives of the 66 people on board could have been saved. But many independent experts believe that this report still has many questions. They suspect that the black box may have been tampered with after being backed up and retrieved, casting doubt on the credibility of the final conclusions. To this day, whether the truth is being hidden remains unanswered. In addition to technical and procedural issues, many people believe that the deeper reason comes from human nature. The veteran captain, who had more than 7,900 hours of flying experience and served in the Air Force, may have been overconfident in his judgment at a critical moment because of his extensive experience.